Nile Gold, a crystal malt lager beyond an ordinary malt. KFM time check with City Tires. It's 7 p.m. City Tires, keeping you safe on the road. Now it's time for KFM Hot Seat.
These are facts based on evidence. Please
catch the fire tonight on KFM's Hot Seat every evening 7 to 8 p.m.
That we want to somersault ourselves into power. How can he dare say that?
It's hot, it's live, provocative, and digs deep into the issues. It's KFM's Hot Seat.
Until we all become angry. What are you trying to achieve? That's why I was not appointed. What are you talking about?
KFM Hot Seat in association with Nile Gold, a crystal malt lager beyond an ordinary malt.
A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the 933 KFM Hot Seat. Charles Mangushampagi within the studio. Angelo Izama, and in the Hot Seat, we bring you a special panel that will be a regular feature every Wednesday discussing hot issues on the Hot Seat. Let me start the introductions with the only lady in the studio. Jackie Asiimwe is a women's rights activist. Women's rights activist? Women's rights activist? Which is the right?
An activist.
He's an activist.
Yeah.
Very nice to have you, Jackie, on the Hot Seat.
Thank you, Charles. Good evening, listeners.
Godber Tumushabe, Executive Director, Advocates Coalition on Development and Environment, is a policy analyst. Godber, very nice to have you on the Hot Seat.
Good evening, listeners.
And a national politician. I was being reminded that's the best way to introduce Norbert Mao today. A national politician, Norbert Mao, President General of the Democratic Party.
Nationalist.
Nationalist.
As opposed to a provincial one, which is what you are.
Thanks, Charles.
He's revived.
And, dear listeners, please ignore Angelo.
Norbert is trying to revive his Nile Republic, I've been told, cutting off areas north of Karuma. North of the area of Karuma, yes, I think something like that. But we'll discuss that on another occasion. The hottest issue during the week so far are still issues concerning oil governance in Uganda. We'll be discussing
oily issues.
Oily issues. The state of accountability and democracy in Uganda, as it is today, looking at specific areas of interest, the oil discussion, the resignations of the ministers over issues of accountability and good governance. And the major question is, how does this affect the ordinary person in Uganda? You can see all of you are scanning through that letter, which the president was speaking through bits and pieces yesterday with his caucus, in the caucus discussion, that petition to the UK Parliament. Godber, I'd like to start with you. You've been watching the oil debate. You see where it is today. Yesterday, Talo signing the farm down with CNOOC, the Chinese national offshore oil company, and Total of France, and announcing that production on a small scale will begin next year, 2013, but commercial production begins in 2016. The biggest question is, with the back and forth debate, of course, there was also the court ruling that lifted the injunction on an investigation in Parliament over alleged bribery in the oil sector after the signatures with Total and CNOOC had already been inked, meaning that they were trying to close the gate after the horses had already bolted. Where does this place the ordinary Ugandan who's been watching this discussion?
I don't think that right now the ordinary Ugandan is really part of this discussion. If anything, both ordinary Ugandans and the extraordinary Ugandans like you and I are almost moving in the back seat of the debate on oil. So the ordinary, I don't think that we really at this point would be talking about the ordinary Ugandan, because the issues here that one, these companies that you see here, Total, CNOOC, Taro, no matter when they move into these areas for their business, they have the full backing of their governments. So as you see them moving, you realize that actually even their embassies here are always, working and making sure that they are able to seal these deals. Now, the challenge that we have as a country is that we are fairly disorganized because we cannot generate a consensus on how best we can govern these resources and how best we can negotiate with these companies. And essentially what is happening now is that the companies are coming in when you don't have an appropriate legal framework, you don't have an appropriate institutional framework, you don't have a national consensus among the key players, the parliament, the legislature, and other actors, that gives you the strength as a country to really be able to negotiate for your best. So I think we are starting off at a point where we really are likely to be disadvantaged as a country. And you see, I think there are those people who argue that, we are going to be delayed, the investors could run away. These companies are not here for charity. They are not religious institutions. They are doing business. And so we have something to offer, and they want to make business. So the idea that if we don't rush things and bamboozle everybody, that the companies would run away, I think is quite misleading, and I think unhelpful for this country.
Jackie, Godber talks about a fairly disorganized society that is not sure, has failed to generate consensus on how to manage these resources. Is this actual disorganization? Is it deliberate actions of some people who believe they are better in the know and those who want to take a part of the petroleum resource? How do you look at it?
I think my view is, and having visited the oil region several times, where communities have been talked to about this oil resource, I think what I feel is a society that is, on the one hand, largely suspicious, in whose interest, in whose name is government of Uganda acting. And I think, history tells us that usually many of these interests are very narrow. They are for the few, the powerful, those that are already, close to power or in power, in fact. So there are those that are really suspicious. There are those that, of course, are totally clueless, because I think government has also not been robust and forthcoming in terms of information. And so, even if they were to benefit, even if they could do something about what's going on, they are largely clueless. Nobody tells them the right information, nobody tells them in time. And also, I think when we keep the discussion either in Bunyoro and not for the whole of Uganda, that also, fragments some of these pieces. So I think, there are those two sides that I see, clueless or suspicious. And some, I think, really fearful, because we have, of course, had the conversation around the potential of oil becoming a curse. And, the way that we are behaving, it surely can become. And we see a dark tunnel that we are heading down.
Chairman Mao, you served in Parliament for 2 terms. The biggest contest is around Parliament. The MPs petitioning the House of Commons are in Parliament. The MPs who have been debating on both sides of the aisle, who have been investigating the documents that were presented about alleged bribery, is all playing out in Parliament. Do you, in your view, has Parliament schooled itself sufficiently? Has it invested adequate resources to help, as people's representatives, steer this country through what potentially could be a very good resource discovery, but what could also be potentially very harmful to this country and its people?
When you talk about oil, there are 3 main issues. First, transparency, the protection of the environment, and I'm glad that Godber is here. Already, elephants are leaving most of those areas. The chemicals that are emitted, the byproducts of some of these activities surrounding exploration, is chasing away the elephants. And it's the elephant dung which is washed by the rain into the rivers to provide food for the fish. So the elephants will leave, the fish population will decline. There has got to be a comprehensive plan for alternative employment for the fishermen, the farmers, and then regulating the employment practices. So, I think President Museveni these days behaves more like he's the board chairman of Talo rather than the president of the Republic of Uganda. Every time he opens his mouth, for instance, he is saying the investors will flee. Let me go on record. There's no African country that has opened up its economy so wide open to foreign investors, in fact, foreign exploitation, than Uganda. In fact, everybody who wants to play games with anybody's economy comes to Uganda. This is so we don't want a president who is like a son who holds down his mother to be raped for a little fee. So the attitude of the president is really disturbing. I had been briefed that President Museveni was handling the oil issue very well. That's what I was told by those who are at the heart of it. They said he took a firm stand, but all of a sudden, he seems to be under a lot of pressure. Now, there's a contest between pressure from the people of Uganda saying you can't launch a train without building the railway line. So he's saying, let the train come. We shall build the railway as we move. That's why he's told Parliament that it does not matter whether we have the legal framework or not. So Parliament is right to insist that there has got to be a legal framework. Now, the other pressure on President Museveni is probably what forced him to say the Constitution is an obstacle to him. Now, when the president who lifted up the Bible and swore to uphold, defend, and protect the Constitution suddenly says the Constitution is standing in his way, then I think we do have a problem. He is the chief custodian of the law. So, the conflict between Parliament and the executive, in this case President Museveni, is largely about how not to put the cart before the horse. We want the oil money, for God's sake. We need this oil money so that we can pay off our debts, so that we can build infrastructure, so that we can really deal with the social challenges that we face. Uganda has the youngest population, most of which is not working. So we need really cash flow, which is unprecedented. So President Museveni should not think that he's the only person who cares about this country and the flow of the oil money. So, Parliament, you were right to say, you know, Parliament rushed to close the stable door after the horse has bolted. There are those who have been arguing that, you know, the oil industry is very sensitive. President Museveni was right. Parliament has delayed and so on. My advice.
I mean that camp, by the way.
Yeah. Angelo is in that camp.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Angelo has been a strong advocate
For that deal and against the
these
moratorium.
processes are being delayed so much, and they shouldn't be delayed.
We don't have time, actually. We are already trying to play catch up to very complex processes. Other countries have gone ahead.
No,
the idea, first of all, it is untrue, Charles, that there is no appropriate legal framework. This is not true. I mean, there is a law that is existing now. 3 pieces of legislation. You can say that they're inadequate in some areas, but for the purposes of what's happening now.
So what does that mean?
Yeah.
Inappropriate in some areas, what does that mean?
I mean, if you're looking at the issue of environment that Norbert Mao is talking about, last I checked, there are few countries where oil is being drilled in a particularly environmentally sensitive area like ours. That is something that we have to experiment with. Whether or not we wait for a legal framework is besides the issue.
Angela, isn't that you cut through Norbert before he finished his point? But the question is, why the rush?
Why the rush?
I mean, this country has been here for the last. We're celebrating 50 years as an
Maybe
independent
the question
country this
to
year.
Angelo should be, who is really delaying? It's the
actually,
executive which should
actually,
be
that's the fundamental
originating the
question.
laws.
Who is delaying? Because this government adopted a policy in 2008. In that policy, government recognizes that the nature of the oil business requires new laws to be put in place. That the nature of oil business requires new institutions to be put in place. And all those processes are processes that can be initiated by the executive. So when Angelo says that we are delaying,
No, the delay is with regard to the transaction. The
Who-
transaction had been on
Who
ice
is being
for
delayed?
almost 20 months.
Is another question.
Yes.
no, Charles,
yes.
Charles, 20 months is less than 2 years. Between 2008 and 2011, when Parliament had to take the initiative and say, where are these laws? Those are 3 years. So government of Uganda could have actually expeditiously handled the legislative agenda on oil.
But I'm putting it
Gentlemen,
to you, Godber,
gentlemen
as a
and
lawyer,
ladies,
just
can we
before
take
you-
the break
but
now
just
and come
before
back?
you take the
Can we
break.
pick it up from
Because-
there?
Because Godber is a lawyer.
Angelo,
if you
hold
look
it.
at the 1985 law, and you look at the laws that are tabled, what are the significant differences?
I can respond to that.
Let's take
after
the break and come back
yeah.
to that.
KFM Hot Seat. The hottest